Thank you for being here tonight. This is a time when you can stretch, change your position, look around, see who's in the room. Appreciate you guys coming out with the inclement weather. Isn't it nice to meditate and listen to the thunder? I really like that. So I'm Thia, and I'm one of your Dharma leaders serving IMC Charlotte. I'm happy to be here. Tonight I'd like to explore a corner of the complicated web of our minds, specifically the fear and anxiety parts. I'd like to acknowledge that we're living in times that feel especially precarious and worrisome, and I don't need to go into the long list of potential threats. But because of these different situations, the seeds of fear and anxiety are sort of sprinkled into our minds every day in different ways. In a recently revised article on fear, Philip Moffitt wrote, "Being mindful of your fears allows them to become your teacher. This can give purpose to what otherwise might just be meaningless suffering." And I agree with that, so I thought this would be a good thing to bring tonight, looking at fear and anxiety, and then pivoting towards what really matters. So I'm hoping tonight that we can learn to see some of our fear and anxiety as our teacher, and observe the situations that trigger us, like public speaking, and see what the components are of that, and kind of like tease it apart. It makes it easier to understand, and when we understand something, we're less threatened by it. So this is going to be specific, sort of a custom situation for each person in the room, because we all have different life stories, and our current situations are probably varied, but we're all in the same human boat. And as students of the Buddha's teachings, we know that the first noble truth is that in some way, shape, or form, we're suffering, or experiencing stress or disappointment. So I'd like to touch on three salient views about this. The first two are other than the Dharma, and the third one is a Dharmic view. And I'm hoping that you can see how closely these different views tend to weave together. So the first one will be a psychological approach. I'm not a psychotherapist, but I'm really interested in mind training, and I've been the grateful recipient of a whole lot of therapy. And I've long noticed an overlap between the Dharma and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And then the second one will be just a scientific view of the brain, how the brain is wired and why it goes to fear and anxiety sometimes. And then the third one will be an offering from the Dharma, specifically from Dharma teacher Rob Burbea. He was the guiding teacher at Gaia House in outside of London until he passed in 2020. So the psychological approaches, like cognitive behavioral therapy, involve thinking our way through an experience that has happened that usually we're only trying to figure it out if it had an unpleasant tone to it. Usually with the pleasant ones, we're like, yeah, more of that, please. But if we're working with an unpleasant experience, we want to tease out the difference between the facts, what happened, and then our thoughts about what happened, and then the emotions that result from the thinking about what happened. So those three things usually just collapse together, and then we have an action that may follow that's sometimes skillful and sometimes not skillful. So instead of letting these things collapse together, because we're meditators, we can put space between them. When we sit even, we can feel something unpleasant come up. We can hear our brain go, oh, it's too cold in here. And then our emotions say, oh, I wish I grabbed a blanket. And then, off we go, right? But when you tease it apart, it kind of takes the steam out of the situation. It takes the power out of it. And because we're meditators, we almost always have the opportunity to respond instead of react to the thoughts and feelings that are generated by the endless situations that are unfolding in life all the time. In some psychotherapeutic circles, they call the thoughts and feelings meaning making. And I really like that term because without the meaning making, it's just an event. It doesn't really mean anything. It just happened. So we add the meaning ourselves. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, teaches that when an experience is particularly difficult or painful, the likelihood is that we have personally assigned a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings and made a big meaning to help make it painful. And this aligns perfectly with the Buddha's teachings on the first era, the painful thing, and then all the things that we think about it that causes more pain, what's called the second era. So that's a very brief peek into CBT therapy. Again, this is just my simplified understanding. But in a nutshell, it boils down to the fact that our meanings and our way of seeing and perceiving things, these are the primary culprit for our difficulty and our unhappiness in life. This is the very thing that the teachings of the Buddha takes aim at. It's looking at mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of feelings. So I see the connections here to the foundations of mindfulness training, and the processes of examination are almost the same. And guess which one has been around longer? So next is scientific learnings, or the biology of fear. This is from the National Institute of Health, the Library of Medicine, .gov site. And it's so interesting. Sometimes it's fun to get nerdy about how the brain works. There's imaging and studies on the brain, what parts of the brain light up when we're afraid, when we feel anxiety, and it's actually not just a specific part of the brain. Of course, it's the amygdala, that primal part at the base, but it's actually scattered all through the brain because of the associated thoughts and feelings. So fear, from a science-based perspective, is considered a central state, meaning it's present in all healthy human brains. But it's a transient state. It's not meant to be sustained. So we can really suffer if we live in fear over a period of months or years. We can literally suffer physically and mentally. Fear is connected to our basic adaptive survival system. It's hardwired in, and it's defined as an emotion in terms of it being caused by a particular pattern of threat, some kind of stimuli, and in turn, fear causes patterns of adaptive behavior because the brain wants to protect us. It's just trying to help us avoid danger. So that's a really simple look at the science-based parts of it. But from a scientific perspective, again, Stanislav Tomsky writes, fear and anxiety can be treated through a combination of psychological and physiological approaches, which focus on changing the brain's response to stimuli, which, guess what, is also what mindfulness-based meditation does. We build capacity through mechanisms such as exposure therapy, which is not pushing away the unpleasant. Mindfulness meditation techniques are now also embraced as scientific therapies in dealing with PTSD, fear and anxiety. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which we just talked about, and when indicated, sometimes we need medication to calm certain parts of the brain that are chemically imbalanced and bring it back into balance. So, in addition, scientific studies have shown us that building and maintaining strong support systems, i.e. friends and community, like here tonight, is really important for resilience. We have to feel like we know people who kind of have our back, who we can turn to, who we can talk to. Also, celebrating progress, no matter how small, science shows it builds a positive mindset and it bolsters our determination to continue addressing obstacles. This can be found in our small groups and in our friendships here. Studies on folks with post-traumatic stress syndrome suggest that surviving adversity often brings with it significant personal developments, including, but not limited to, very deep relationships with folks that may have gone through that with us or helped us through that. It gives us a greater sense of agency, really begins to define part of who we are, and a sense of increased capacity. You know, you're really in your boots when you recover from something big. And it gives us a clearer understanding of a path and a purpose in life. So this tracks right along with realizing the first noble truth, that there is suffering in life, and being able to understand our pain and our setbacks, and to actually be a student of them, to learn from them, turns them into something beneficial. And in doing so, hopefully we become a little wiser and maybe a little more humble. So the third piece of this is teachings from the Dharma. Robert Bea, who I mentioned, was a highly skilled Dharma leader, and he wrote a book called Seeing That Frees. It's all about right view. What is the lens that we see our life through? The subtitle is Meditations on Emptiness and Dependent Arising. And in the preface of this very large book, he says, different Buddhist traditions hold varying views regarding the importance of analytical investigation on the path. For some, this is an indispensable part of the journey. For others, investigation is seen merely as an obstacle. He says both of these perspectives play a role in our journey to untangle the heart and the mind in order to create an approach that's broad and flexible and inclusive. Again, we're not clinging to views, we're not pushing anything away, we're experimenting, we're seeing what's true and what's not true from our own experience. So the key or the insight is having the discernment to know which approach to use at what time to address a specific situation. About suffering, the category that fear and anxiety fall into, he goes on to say, fundamentally what gets us into trouble are the ways that we typically view things, this and blind clinging to our ways of seeing instead of investigating. At the root of fear and anxiety, and exacerbating fear and anxiety, is a habitual conception, a way of looking at life that we haven't challenged. This is mindfulness at work, to unpack this. This is the uncollapsing mentioned at the beginning of the talk. He goes on to say, it is precisely this thinking process that needs to be addressed and replaced. So we can notice that we tend to keep some experiences alive by resisting them over and over and revisiting them and rehashing them. And this can actually cause resentment, which a friend of mine pointed out is resentiment. We keep feeling this feeling over and over, creating resentment instead of just letting it go, letting it neutralize, and figuring out what it is in us that is being so reactive to the thing. We can even get addicted to this kind of anxiety and worry because it brings a certain form of energy, you know, it might make things interesting. This is another reason why we practice, is to see this. And even though Rob's book addresses challenging material like emptiness and dependent origination, he emphasizes again and again the huge benefit of the attitudes of play and experimentation, not to take it too seriously. I mean, you really can laugh about, you know, thinking the same thing for the 10th or 15th time, you know, in an hour. It's like sometimes your brain just keeps going back to this thing. And I mean, eventually it's actually funny when you notice it. So we tend to learn more and better when we practice in a relaxed way. And since developing our practice is learning a new life skill, it's important to bring curiosity, playfulness, improvisation. These are indispensable here. He says only a small part of life's mysteries can be communicated through words. So much is meant to be discovered for ourselves. So I'd like to close with a favorite real quote from the Buddha. Whatever a person frequently thinks about and ponders, this will become the inclination of their mind. So hopefully the teachings that are offered here weekly on topics like the noble truth of suffering and its end, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and the 3 characteristics of existence will begin to become apparent in your own life and bring interesting and skillful thoughts to your mind in the moments when life is messy and it's 100 degrees outside, or you're sad, or you're angry, or you're tired, or all of these are happening. There is a way through. We have a great community here and online. And we're a refuge for ourselves when we practice. We're a refuge for each other. We can rest our minds and our hearts. May it be so.